We're standing in front of a cornfield that's been hit by frost. The frost was about a week ago on the 7th or 8th of September. Here we are on the 15th. It certainly expressed itself. You can see the gray leaves, but you can't always tell how much damage is done to a field when you're looking at the outside of the field, because corn respirates, and the more that it respirates, the more it holds the frost from going down into the canopy. So on the outside, obviously, fully exposed to the cold temperatures. Inside, not as much. Let's go take a look and see what we see inside this cornfield. So I'm in 4th row. Come on in, let's take a closer look. As you'll notice, as you're coming in, there's still quite a little bit of green leaves. Chlorophyll is still intact on the lower portions of the leaves. But what we're really interested in is where is it at the ear? So here we have an ear that's still green, has not been frosted. So fully inside this corn, about 10 to 20 rows inside from the edge of the field, and you can clearly see that the frost has not come all the way through the corn. The ears are still intact. What drives this corn's process is the chlorophyll above the ear, but actually, as long as the ear is intact, any kind of green plant that captures sunlight will complete the photosynthesis process for the plant. This is the most important leaf, and some of it has been compromised, of course. This leaf is in much better shape. This leaf's got quite a little bit as well. The leaves above the ears traditionally drive the grain fill. The ear is a little less mature than what we have seen in some fields that were 10 days away. So this would be further than 10 days away from harvest. With this amount of green, and with the fact that the ears are still intact, this corn is still progressing slower than it would be if all the leaves were intact, but still it's going to continue to accumulate dry matter and starch. And Mireille, I'd like Mireille to tell us a little bit about what we can anticipate when we see corn that is frosted in terms of that accumulation. Have you have any studies on that?
Yeah, what we see is that I agree with you that even though you have some frost damage here, it does seem that the corn is still maturing, and it might be maturing at a slower rate, which means that we might actually end up harvesting this corn with a higher moisture than normal, and that's okay, I guess. The most important thing is that not to immediately decide to chop this corn because it has some frost damage. To acknowledge that dry matter, again, moisture level are the important target points we're trying to achieve here. So have in mind that it's gonna probably be more wet, and when we're dealing with a wet corn silage, it's important to minimize, the leaching, the leachate, the loss of nutrients. A suggestion that we could do in that case, for example, is to use some inoculants. For example, that's one of the cases where using an inoculant with silage makes lots of sense, because you want that fermentation to start as fast as possible. You want to move on, drop that pH, because you already have some stress in your corn. So that will significantly help. And the thing to keep in mind, though, whenever you are dealing with a wet silage, you could run into some Clostridia problems. So you need to monitor that, and Clostridia will cause health problems, for example, in dairy cows. So always monitor your silage to make sure that you're not running into that issue. I get asked about mycotoxins, and typically you see mycotoxins in the cases of corn silage that's too dry. Mm-hmm. So typically that's not an issue with a wet silage.
So if this field gets a frost tonight, and we don't have a lot of protection on the top, the ground has not been watered for a day or two. So we could see the frost come down through this plant. If that happened, and we had a frost that killed the ear, what would you anticipate? You mentioned that at the stage we're at here, the corn's going to be a little on the wet side because there's still plenty of moisture in the stalk, and it's drawing the moisture a little less aggressively. What happens if we frosted this down to the ground? What's your thoughts there?
So in that case, I would personally still wait for 2 or 3 days before chopping. Again, hoping that you are going to get that dry matter accumulation. But again, if you have to chop and it's wet, this is where the details that the attention to details that we talked about is even more important in those cases. So you really need, you don't have a perfect situation, but you need to manage your other aspects of ensiling the corn to really decrease the amount of loss, dry matter loss.
So would it be fair to say if you get a second frost and you've got it frosted down, the first thing you do is take 3 or 4 ears and
measure your dry
matter, and then
applies. Absolutely.
And then start to make a plan.
Yes.
Don't judge it by the outside of the field. Let's get inside, take a couple stalks, dry matter, stick it in a microwave.
Absolutely. And again,
ask for
it looks
forgiveness
a lot
from
worse from there.
Yes. Ask for forgiveness from your spouse for doing it, but go ahead and get it done.
No,
yes.
Absolutely. Get it done. And again, this is if it's not a perfect situation, but you could still have a relatively good quality corn silage,
yes.
actually, if you follow the other recommendation. Minimize the loss you're having from from packing. For example, add an inoculant, monitor the quality, phase management when you're feeding. So a lot of these management tips will help you still make a good corn silage.
Thanks again, Mireille.
Thank you. Pleasure.